very much for coming along this evening to this event on the long legacy, London 2062. UCL calls itself, or names itself, London's Global University. That might have originally been a name coined to irritate the other universities in London. However, I think time has shown that it has a degree of resonance. And as a global university, we have asked ourselves the question, what is the role of a leading university in the world? And we feel that it's important that not only do we carry out world-class research, but that we actually integrate and cross-tension, if you like, the expertise that we have in different disciplines to try to find solutions to globally significant problems. So as Vice Provost for Research, my responsibility is to try to encourage colleagues to cross the traditional divide of different disciplines to come up with solutions or possible solutions to major problems. And as a result, what we've done at UCL is to create and define 4 grand challenges which focus on major societal issues which the world faces. The first of these grand challenges is global health. Why is it that citizens of sub-Saharan African countries are actually dying from diseases that can be readily treated here at UCH or elsewhere? The second of our grand challenges is sustainable cities, and that's spawned some of the activity that we'll talk about tonight. Our third grand challenge is intercultural interaction, and our fourth grand challenge is human well-being. Now, these grand challenges are being, if you like, evolved over the last couple of years and continue to do so. But tonight we are focusing on the cities problem. And in the sustainable cities equation and studies that we've been carrying out at UCL, focused on a variety of things. For instance, recently in May we published a commission with the Lancet on healthy cities. What is it one has to do to ensure that cities around the world are healthy places and engender healthy lives for their citizens? But tonight we focus on the analysis of colleagues at UCL and outside UCL that have been working in the last year or so on aspects related to London and the future of London. And we titled that project London 2062, a 50-year view forward as to what are the challenges, what are the issues that this wonderful metropolitan city face, and how is it that we could start thinking now in a way which will avoid and alleviate some of the challenges and the negatives which could occur, and obviously what is it that we need to do to conserve the positive features of London. And I think in this summer we've all seen some of the fabulous things that bring London to life and what makes London a special place. And I think it's really exciting tonight to be able to talk about how it is that we can capture, grow that, and actually have this long legacy 50 years after the Olympics. So I'm delighted this evening that we have a number of colleagues who have been involved with the thinking and the development of this analysis. And we'll be hearing from 3 of them this evening. Later on in the year, or maybe at the beginning of 2013, we will be publishing a book which captures the ideas of a number of other colleagues and which will be, I think, launching a little bit later on in there. But I'd like to start this evening, therefore, by asking my colleagues, 3 colleagues, to come and give some of their thoughts and about some of the issues. And after they've spoken, we'll be able to have a dialogue and discussion with the questions from the audience. So to start this evening, I'd like to introduce to you Ben Harrison, who is the Director of Future of London and has been involved in the discussions throughout the last year or so, and is going to give us a synoptic overview of some of the thinking which is being developed. So, Ben, can I pass over to you?
Yes, it is. Can I just start by asking if you can all hear me all right? Is the mic? It sounds like it is. Excellent. Thank you very much, David, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start with what I have prepared to say tonight, I just also want to thank Sarah Bell, Mark Tudor-Jones, James Paskins and Ian Scott from UCL for offering the invitation to Future of London to come and get involved in this programme of work. It's been a fantastically interesting one, and we specifically were involved in running a series of seminars at the start of this year, looking at a number of different related disciplines and policy areas, and I'm going to say a bit more about that in a moment. Before I do that, though, I do want to just take the opportunity to give a bit of an introduction to Future of London. We're a relatively young organisation, and I'm conscious that our involvement in this series may well be the first time that many of you have come across us as an organisation. So I'll do a brief run through of that, and then following that, I will give a brief overview, as David mentioned, of some of the areas where we were able to find some consensus from our events and the contributions that were made within them, and then some key points of difference going forward about London's future over the next 50 years. So to begin, what is Future of London? Well, as our strapline says, we're an independent, not-for-profit policy network focused on the big challenges facing regeneration, housing and economic development practitioners in London. What does that mean specifically? Well, we are a membership organisation bringing together London boroughs, registered providers and housing associations, the GLA, TfL, and overall we have three main programmes of activity. The first is focused on developing the next generation of regeneration leaders in London. We run a training and development programme called the Future London Leaders, and that identifies individuals from across our membership who tend to be between 5 and 7 years into their career, and provides a range of development and networking opportunities for them. We're into the fourth round of that programme. It's been hugely successful and is excuse me, a very popular part of our programme, and we're about to launch the next round next month. We also offer our members various forums to share best practice and innovative thinking across the London practitioner network. We're very conscious that despite being a global city, actually a lot of what goes on in London can be surprisingly parochial, and building relationships across borough boundaries and between organisations is something which we believe is absolutely vital if we're going to learn the lessons from the various programmes of regeneration underway across the capital. And finally, we also produce various outputs from a research and a policy point of view, but really with a specific focus on pieces of work that will be of practical assistance and are really focused on delivery. Hopefully you've seen a few copies of reports that we've launched over the past 12 months this evening. They've tended to focus on the implementation of various pieces of government legislation, most notably the Green Deal, and how that can work in London. And we've just published a report recently on flows of overseas investment into the London property market, what that's doing to house prices and what it means going forward for housing policy. So to deliver this work, we engage in a range of partnerships, working with a diverse group of organisations from UCL through to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, major house builders and big city law firms to deliver a vibrant programme, as I say, with a number of different component parts. Our membership for 2012 is here. We're just about to finalise that for 2013. And if you are interested in getting involved in our network, then please do visit our website. It's futureoflondon.org.uk. And there's various different ways that you can become individually involved or as an organisation. So that's the mini sales pitch over. Turning to think about London 2062 and the seminar series that we collaborated with Sarah, Mark and colleagues on in the spring of this year. The seminar series itself consisted of 4 sessions. We welcomed a total of over 100 participants drawn both from the academic community but also from our practitioner network. Each was designed to explore a specific topic, energy, housing, transport and the economy, looking ahead over a 50-year timeline. And alongside these events, you'll have no doubt seen that colleagues at UCL and ourselves have published a range of think pieces, articles and essays, and as David mentioned, there is a more substantial output coming next year. In terms of the sessions themselves and what we, the themes that emerged from them, well, clearly we set our contributors a very large and probably unfair challenge to conceive of what London's going to be like over a 50-year timeline. It's not a usual task that you present to people that you're inviting to come and speak in an event. And I guess perhaps reflecting the sort of the pre-Olympics double-dip recession gloom that pervaded over London at that time, it's fair to say that we heard some fairly terrifying projections of what London was going to be like in 50 years' time. Overcrowded and bursting at the seams, subject to the mal effects of large temperature increases and rising sea levels as a result of global climate change, more unequal than ever, and with an economy unable to compete with rising global megacities in the east. Of course, others were simply holding out the hope that the hoverboards that we were promised by the year 2000 would have materialised by then. But by and large, it was a pessimistic set of contributions that we received from a number of individuals. Having said that, though, there were definite areas of consensus and disagreement, both between and within the practitioner and academic groups that we talked to and who presented to us. And I'd just now like to highlight a few of these, perhaps to inform some of the discussion that we're going to have later on in the evening. So first of all, to look at where there was a degree of consensus amongst our contributors. When taking into account a rather unscientific show of hands in the seminar, looking at specifically at the economy, but also with the general nature and tone of contributions throughout the series, it seemed pretty clear that most people were of the view that London will continue to be an unequal place and actually will become more unequal over the next 50 years as things stand. Many were concerned with the gap between those at the bottom and the top of the income and well-being scales continuing to increase, and in particular disparities between inner and outer London also becoming wider. Secondly, when considering energy policy, all four of our sector specialists highlighted the Danish model of decentralised energy as a key example that London should look to follow in the years ahead. And with colleagues both within the GLA and in our borough members already pursuing schemes in this regard, there was certainly some degree of optimism that progress in this area will be possible, and that this will be a very important component part of London meeting its carbon reduction commitments by 2062. Third, the successful delivery of Crossrail is clearly vital to the future development of London. But we should also be actively considering what comes next in terms of major investments in London's transport. And there was a sense that perhaps more thought needs to be given to the period between 2020 and 2040 in terms of what that investment is going to look like and how transport can meet the needs of a changing London economy over that period of time. And fourth and finally, it was widely recognised that tough decisions are going to be needed, to improve London's energy efficiency and reduce its carbon output of its building stock, of its built environment rather. Specific policy initiatives like the Green Deal and Eco are felt to be good places to start, but clearly there are significant financial and delivery hurdles that need to be cleared if London is to meet, if these schemes are to be widely taken up and their benefits felt across London. And given that the proportion of the built environment that is still going to be in use in London in 50 years' time is so high, it really does need to be a major priority for London in the years ahead. And then turning to some of the areas where there was more disagreement or uncertainty around where London will be in the next 50 years. Much discussion was had over whether we need a new economic model in light of the recent financial crisis, and whether the old way of assessing and looking at London's economy was somehow no longer fit for purpose. On the other hand, many of our contributors felt that actually to throw the baby out with the bathwater and not play to London's existing strengths would be a huge mistake. And I think finding a resolution within those 2 points of view was probably beyond the 2 hours that we had to debate it, but it's something which is going to be developing over the coming years. And really, I think a key point of focus for Future of London going forward is going to be thinking, well, if we are serious about developing a more polycentric London economy with a diverse set of sectors stretching beyond financial services but taking advantage of new opportunities in the digital economy, what does that really look like? And what, as practitioners, do we need to do in order to achieve it? Secondly, a clear area of uncertainty was around what, if any, new powers London should seek from central government. Clearly, we have in power at the moment a government that is serious about devolving power to a local area. Since the events were held, we've obviously seen city deals and a significant devolution of power to Leeds and Manchester and Newcastle. And the Localism Act, it's true, did bring additional powers to the mayoralty in London and increased the scope of mayoral involvement in housing development and other areas. But I think a key question for the next 2 to 3 years will really be, well, should London be looking for a new settlement to deliver growth in the period ahead? And will, is it right that London, for instance, takes control fully of the business rate, for example, which has been long on the agenda, or other pots of money that could potentially be used to boost investment in the capital, not without controversy, not without extremely complicated areas, but nevertheless, with Boris Johnson probably never being more powerful than he is right now, you would imagine that the scope for him to go back to David Cameron and demand a better settlement for London will be one to look out for. Thirdly, and perhaps most controversially of all, the future of aviation policy in London was a big feature of our transport session. Do we expand our existing airport capacity incrementally, build a new hub airport, essentially for Europe in the Thames estuary, or actually do nothing and take the view that London's priorities should lie elsewhere, and that the costs of increasing air travel in London to perhaps some of our other aims and ambitions for the capital would be too great and therefore not worth doing. Clearly, it's a hot topic politically, so hot, in fact, that it's been kicked well and truly into the long grass for this Parliament, with none of the major parties that keen to engage with it. Nevertheless, the issue is going to continue to dominate public debate, and it's not a decision that can be put off forever. And whichever way it goes, it's going to have major implications for the future direction of development in the capital, geographically, environmentally, and socially. And fourth and finally, and extremely importantly, how can London deliver the number and types of new homes it requires to meet the needs of a population that's projected to grow significantly over the decades ahead, while also ensuring that access to this housing is widened. There is consensus across the practitioner network that in London that some of the old models for delivering housing, and in particular affordable housing, are now dead in the water. We are very unlikely to see a return to the levels of public subsidy for affordable housing in London that we've seen prior to 2010. And therefore, a new model of investment is required. Quite what that's going to look like is not clear right now, but we have probably a 2-year window before 2015 to really think about what that should look like for London and be proactive about it. So I think that's going to be a key priority in the years ahead, and will have very long-lasting impacts in looking forward to 2062. So those are some themes and questions emerging from the 2062 event series, and I hope they can inform and spark some discussion later on this evening. They're by no means comprehensive, but each will have a fundamental bearing on the kind of city that we inhabit over the coming decades. Future of London will certainly be interrogating these issues in more detail over the coming months, and in doing so we look forward to continuing our partnership with UCL. And as I mentioned earlier in the evening, if you do want to know more about Future London or become actively engaged in some of our projects and programmes, then please do visit the website or catch myself later on this evening. And I look forward to answering your questions as and when we move to that part. I'll hand over to Ben now.
very much. So there we have a synoptic, quick whistle-stop tour through some of the topics that have been discussed. Next, we're going to hear from Ben Campkin, who is Senior Lecturer in the Bartlett School here at UCL and Director of the UCL Urban Laboratory, on some aspects of the urban regeneration challenges, focusing now on a little specific window, following up that more general oversight. So, Ben, over to you.
I just managed to slow us down. Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak this evening and to be part of the London 2062 project. I think it's been a really excellent initiative, so thanks to the colleagues that have been organising it, both in UCL and in Future for London. We've had some really stimulating conversations, and I think it's really important to have these conversations between academic researchers and practitioners and policymakers around these really important questions. I guess I've been involved with 2 London 2062 events, so I did 2 different talks, and I seem to have spent both of them trying to avoid talking about the long-distant future in different ways, trying to avoid this idea of future gazing. But what I wanted to do today was really think through some of the ideas that came out of the London 2062 housing workshop that I participated in relation. And not all of those ideas were specifically about housing, actually. Some of them were about wider regeneration issues, and to think about those in relation to the Olympic legacy. So, and I should say also that this comes partly out of my own research interest in regeneration and the history of regeneration, and also discussions that we've been having in the Urban Laboratory at UCL, which is an interdisciplinary centre for thinking about cities and urbanisation that goes across UCL. So there are ideas in here that come from discussions with colleagues recently as well. In terms of regeneration, I wanted just to start by saying 50 years is not a long time. If we look back at London 50 years ago, there's a noticeable correlation between the areas that we see here identified in the most recent London plan as opportunity areas and the areas that were identified in the 1943 County of London plan as opportunity areas. So this tells us something. These areas that are now designated for future growth are likely to still be growing in opportunity areas in 50 years' time. And the built environment typically changes at a very slow rate. An estimated 75% of London's building stock will be the same in London 2062. This was one of the figures that stuck in my mind from the discussions in the workshops that we had. But as well as built form, the underlying characteristics of different forms of urbanisation obviously have very long-term consequences. And where those are flawed, they could work precisely against the kind of values of equality, diversity, social inclusivity that we talk about when we talk about the current aims of regeneration in London. So the kinds of structures of urbanisation can cause intractable problems as well as improvements for the future. Another point I think that came out of the workshops to me was that our evaluations of the success or failure of different regeneration projects and of the places that are their focus tend to be obfuscated by powerful rhetoric and political ideology. And as the political landscape changes, one generation's utopian schemes become the ruinous backdrop for the next one's vision of a better future. The large-scale physical transformation of the Olympic Park is obviously a very specific kind of urbanisation that's taken place very quickly under special circumstances, eased through by massive public funding, by the UK's largest ever compulsory purchase order, and the ability to use the ODA's phrase to lock down the site temporarily to get this done. And the area's immediate future will be governed by a very particular an exceptional kind of body, the Merrill Development Corporation, which is given special powers. So I think and how that body represents the community's interests is obviously a key issue looking forward to the next 50 years. The Games have obviously provided an extraordinary global spectacle. The Olympic Park has kind of exists as an image itself, but it's also a place of image making, and this image of this transformation, this transformed park has been circulated around the world. But within this, any sense of perhaps the specifics of Stratford and what Stratford needs, what the local area needs, has perhaps been temporarily lost. So we need to now go back to that discussion about regeneration in a very specific part of London with a very specific history, specific community. And obviously the narrative through which the regeneration has taken place has been about a place of poverty, a place of industrial contamination that has literally been regenerated, that it's been cleansed somehow, reconfigured as a place of cultural capital, as a place of consumerism. And the Olympics is a kind of stepping stone on this yellow brick road towards tech city in the long-term regeneration plan. We could debate the direct and abstract value of the gains themselves endlessly, but I don't think that's really the purpose of tonight. I think what I would like to do is focus, and for us to focus constructively on a discussion about what are the values that should underpin regeneration going forward for the next 50 years. The justification has been that the Olympics will accelerate the regeneration of this part of London for the benefit of the local community. So that's what we should try and keep the focus on over the next 50 years. And politicians have already been, and the media have, as I've been watching the Olympics in the news, have already been claiming the regeneration of East London. But that seems kind of incongruous when you actually go to and walk around Stratford and you walk down Stratford High Street, that there's a disconnect. And I know there is a plan to regenerate Stratford High Street, but the fact that it's happened in this reverse order of the park first does leave this disconnect, and one can't help feeling a sense of a kind of isolated Olympic Park, a kind of Vegas-like experience as you walk around it, this island within the urban fabric, and which isn't yet integrated into its context, and that's obviously the challenge for the next 50 years. And you know, the worrying image that comes to mind is of Canary Wharf and the boundaries of Canary Wharf, and the fact, you know, that when you walk from Canary Wharf to Poplar, there's this sudden transition, and it's still not integrated. So I think that, you know, that's a kind of warning that we have to have in mind when we think about integrating this new site into the fabric of the city. So just to go back to that idea of the transformation, the literal regeneration, the cleaning up of the soil, which has obviously been a very key part of the discourse about the transformation of this area. This is an image taken by Mike Wells on the website Games Monitor of some of the earth waiting to be cleaned in these big washing machines. For me, this was one of the most striking images of the redevelopment process, the soil waiting to be cleansed. And you know, this is historically, regeneration in London has always been propelled by these narratives of dirt and disorder and the need for it to be cleansed. Okay, so and in this case, it's about the bioremediation of the soil. So there's a kind of pseudo-scientific justification for regeneration going on there, which I think is interesting. And it also fits into a longer tradition of the East End being described as the kind of dirty other to the West End of London. But I think what's striking is that although public health narratives and narratives of cleansing have always driven regeneration, in this case, unlike the social values and public health initiatives that underpinned urban change in the mid-20th century with the expansion of the welfare estate, somehow this public health narrative is not quite connected. It's part of the discourse, but actually the idea of making the area economically productive again seems to be the key driver. So that's something that I want to come back to later on. I want now just to think about this concept of regeneration. You don't get much more literal images of regeneration than this. But this word has been critiqued a lot recently by urban researchers. So, for example, Michael Edwards, who's at UCL in the planning school, who may be in the audience somewhere, I can't see, writes of it as a slippery word that's used to legitimize almost every construction project. Another academic working in architecture writes that property development is not the same thing as regeneration. I think these are key things to bear in mind. Another academic, Robert Furby, talks about the longer history of this metaphor as a very ancient term that has these kind of religious and spiritual and biological connotations. So, but in the modern period also has this quite conservative idea of personal transformation and empowerment as well. So I think it's important to bear these different ideas of regeneration in mind when we think about it, and to try and be quite precise about what we mean with it. And in London, the concept has been in use in relation to urban development since the mid-20th century, but since the 80s has become very prevalent. It's in the County of London plan. It's likely still to be around in 2062, but in the intervening period between the 40s and now, the meaning has changed quite radically. So in the County of London plan, there's a sense that the city might regenerate itself. There's a sense that if where the city doesn't regenerate itself, that's where it needs major restructuring and renewal, which is quite similar to a kind of the American academic Jane Jacobs' idea of regeneration, which is more about kind of incremental change and from the bottom up. And in the 40s also in London, it's about focusing on the improvement of living conditions for those living in poverty. Since then, regeneration has continued to accrue different meanings as a multi-layered metaphor. And although if the rhetoric of regeneration is now balanced between economic and social values, in practice it seems to focus overridingly on economic growth. And regeneration will be successful, I read in a major newspaper finance section yesterday, in the Olympic case, if in the longer term we see increasing overseas wealth flowing into the area and rich West Londoners moving east. Okay, this is like a fairly straightforward idea of regeneration as gentrification by bringing in outsiders. But regeneration in the Olympic context also proceeds through this idea of trickle down, the idea of trickle down wealth through providing benefits for local communities. But this is something actually that we need to think about more carefully over the next 50 years. The GLA have recently said in relation to creative cities regeneration that actually there isn't any evidence of trickle-down effects to local communities, to the communities that are in regeneration zones at the start of regeneration processes. So this is something we definitely need to invest research into. And many urban studies scholars have in fact suggested that current regeneration strategies actively disadvantage and displace rather than improve the lives of those in whose name they proceed. So according to them, London in 2062 might not be a city, won't be a city necessarily of greater equality of wealth, but will be one of polarization. We saw this in Ben's slide just now, of greater polarization of wealth, but also of health and well-being. Okay, so from the workshop, this rather bleak list of issues came up that I just wanted to quickly run through. That we might expect to see. So increased displacement of local communities and the destruction of the very kind of mixed communities that we talk about when we talk about the aims of regeneration. The destruction of the idea of London as a tolerant city. The reinforcement of this general trend of excluding low-income households from living in central London. Increasing inequalities to access to housing. This debate about affordable housing is really key. Continued decline and fragmentation of the affordable housing stock. This incredibly complex market already of social housing providers being very much pressured by the government to act in particular ways. Perhaps we need to go back to an earlier idea of social registered landlords or to explore new models. Also the polarization of the city through intensive pockets of investment and disinvestment, and the loss of public space to privately managed estates with detrimental consequences on citizenship and the sense of community and belonging in the city. So these are all points that came up, and obviously these are all big issues and we're not going to wrap them up neatly now, but I wanted to outline 5, if you like, grand challenges for regeneration practice moving forward. And there are colleagues who would argue now that actually regeneration is a redundant concept. We need to resist regeneration because regeneration equates to gentrification. But I would like to think that perhaps we can develop new models of ethical regeneration, and this is what I've been discussing with colleagues recently. So just to run through those, I think we need to move to a more, these might sound naive and oversimplifying issues, but I think these, we need to actually go back to basic, what are the ethics of good regeneration? So incremental and contextual urbanization. It seems quite shocking that despite rhetoric otherwise, we are still pursuing urbanization of the city through tabula rasa, through clean urbanism. And since the mid-1970s, state-led regeneration has given way to a more market-led laissez-faire approach. But we're still pursuing this kind of large-scale clean slate urbanism. And in spite of the value attached to heritage and diversity, our large-scale redevelopment projects in working-class areas are particularly characterized by this approach. And break up communities. And so this goes against one of the key ideas that came up for me in the London 2062 project, was that to face these difficult challenges in the future, we need strong and resilient communities. So why are we breaking up these communities now? Secondly, we need to think of and work on mechanisms for preserving affordability in regeneration zones. So as we improve the physical character of the city and change its socio-economic composition, we need to develop ways of preserving affordability for a wide group of people and prioritizing bringing back social value from increased land values for a greater number of people. And this obviously requires radical shifts in our thinking and imagination. There are not easy ways of answering this problem. But if we really believe in diversity, then gentrification, which was a term coined at this university by Ruth Glass in the geography department in 1964, is not the way forward. So thirdly, we need to try and develop ways of tackling the housing crisis that are evidence-based. So extracting, working on the housing crisis in a way which is not subject to the ebbs and flows of politics and changes in political policy, that actually over the next 50 years, in the Olympic boroughs, housing is a key issue. Over 100,000 people on the 3 boroughs waiting list, overcrowding, poor quality and design, unregulated private rental market, poor connectivity, poor communal areas, and a massive shortfall in affordable housing and family housing, and a lack of onus, which is only getting worse, of developers to actually provide any affordable housing. So how can we move away from a politicized, polarized debate about housing towards a more evidence-based approach focused on need? And then fourthly, how do we, this is a question that came up recently at UCL with the Healthy Cities publication of the Healthy Cities pamphlet that David referred to earlier, which I recommend you to read. But how can we reconnect the regeneration agenda in more meaningful ways to the public health agenda, to getting back to an idea of regeneration as primarily about and driven by public health needs? I think this is really key. And then fifthly, how can we move towards a more community-led and open and honest discourse that accompanies regeneration? I think a lot of those, there are a lot of communities affected by regeneration have become very skeptical about what it means and about the consultation processes that they've been subjected to, which they felt to be tokenistic, and a lot of the actual imaging practices and representational practices that we use within regeneration make people suspicious because they are used to deceive and coerce rather than to actually aid the process of connecting communities to the research agenda in meaningful ways. So I think this is another key area that we should be thinking about. So these, I realize, are very big issues and questions, and I'm sure we were asked to be provocative, so I'm not going to apologise for that. But I look forward to hearing your thoughts on these things, and I probably should leave it there. So thank you.
Ben, thank you very much for those thoughts and stimulating questions. Now turn to the final speaker in this part of the evening, Janice Wolfforth, who has been or is a visiting professor here again at Bartlett, but also has been or is still on the planning committee of the London 2012 Olympic Games. So not quite sure what she's been up to recently, but I'm sure you've been quite busy, and perhaps we should congratulate you. You can take all the credit for the Olympics while you're here, but we'll hear your thoughts about some aspects of the future of London. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I'm in a slightly difficult position because I'm still associated with the Olympics, so I can't say much about that because I'm still involved to the end of the month. But I thought coming at the end, it's a rather privileged position because we've had these discussions, we've had the sessions to think about that, and we've had the summation this evening. So what I'm going to try to do, perhaps, is something slightly different. I'm going to take us, I hope you'll come with me anyway, to 2062, when I'm going to see where we are and take a look back to see what's happened, what has come about, have any of these things actually occurred. So here we are in 2062, and thinking about this, 100 years ago, in 1962, the swinging 60s in London were just about to begin. London was the centre of world news. Front covers of international magazines and the world's media were very curious about what was going on in London at the time. London was loosening its belt, and it opened up a huge period of creativity and change that started the separation of London from the rest of the country. Was this where the seeds of change for the creation of the London city-state were sown? London was and wanted to be different. The real turning point came in 1999. Devolution in Scotland and Wales and the powers given to the Mayor of London started an irrevocable process of separation. When Scotland voted for independence in 2014, the transition to the federal state of Great Britain began in earnest. Then, as now, it was the role of England that seemed to be the big issue. And it is hard to look back now from 2062 without remembering those intense debates about the establishment and location of the English Parliament. The main concern was about where it would sit. And when Manchester was chosen, it seemed to galvanise London's position as an international, outward, global city and as a separate part of the UK. Even 50 years ago, in 2012, the Mayor of London had more powers than any other elected politician in the UK, apart from the Prime Minister. So looking back, what led to the creation of the London city-state after the referendum in Scotland? And what difference has it made? Well, firstly, the UK referendum to leave the European Union put London at odds with England, and it found that it had more in common with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The federal structure of Great Britain, as it was devolved, immediately demonstrated that the leadership, vision and agenda for England was different from the drive and determination of London and its people. London was already separate in its governance, so why not take the next step? Manchester was always interested in running the rest of the country. Apologies to any Mancunians. When the Blair government set up Manchester as the second English growth pole after 1997, not many people noticed the way in which it was consistently privileged through government decisions made by both Labour and coalition governments. Devolved spending, new local authority arrangements, and eventually transferring taxation and civil servants to the Greater Manchester Authority showed the government's intent. And if you think those last two things are rather strange, they're already happening. So that's not prediction, that's fact. So when it was proposed in 2016 that the government of England should move to Manchester, London wanted the UK government to stay in London. This separation was needed to enforce some independence on England, but London feared what might follow. In the end, the establishment of the English Parliament in Manchester and the associated move of some civil servants created a much smaller governance machine in London. And so, as many civil servants faced with a move to Manchester opted out through retirement and stayed in London, particularly as pensions could no longer be guaranteed, it also led to a reduction of the UK government as well. However, the effects of this change in the seat of government for England could only be anticipated as being more important at the time, given the amount of debate they engendered. What has proved more critical to London's position is the creation of the United States of Europe, the US of E, in 2057, 100 years after the EU was formed in 1957. Any doubters on this? Read Mr. Barroso's speech yesterday. Since the UK-EU in-out referendum in 2018, the potential for different relationships between the nations in the UK and the EU has emerged. The decision of the UK to opt out and the subsequent decisions of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland to opt back in to the EU created a way for London to rejoin the EU and supported its transition to the United States of Europe. This has been a difficult path to take, not least for London's economy and through the transfer to the euro. But without this, London was faced with a major threat to its international position. Yet despite these changes in government structure and institutions, is London any different from the way it was 50 years ago for ordinary Londoners? Firstly, there are more Londoners. London has continued to grow, not just in the centre, but also in those high-priced housing areas of Barking, Romford and Dagenham that accompanied the East London Airport expansions, plural. Of course, it would be difficult to accommodate so many people if there were still private cars. But the decision to abolish the use of cars in zones 1 and 2 in London has meant more bikes and buses, which have now become the predominant modes of transport. It is rare to see a petrol filling station or car park within these areas now, zones 1 and 2, most having been redeveloped for housing in the 2020s and 2030s. It has also opened the streets to more walking and running, which most people do every day. Much of London's housing looks the same, but the major housing retrofitting programme, which began after the nuclear energy crisis in the 2020s, has also had a major effect. And I suppose you know that we have a real difficulty about replacing our nuclear energy just at the minute, and this might well happen. London is no longer dependent on external energy supplies, and those long-held objections to local energy stations have been tempered by the domestic energy production modules that most buildings now have. London now has more parks, green space and wildlife than many rural areas, as streets and roads have been planted with trees and shrubs in place of the cars and the traffic signs. The dramatic reduction in food consumption in the 2020s, when high sugar, fatty and processed foods were banned, has had the same effect on health as earlier bans on tobacco and alcohol. And only today, New York has banned large-sized fizzy drinks. So, not so off the wall. London may be a larger and denser city, but it's now more self-sustaining than it's ever been. So, what next for London? Will 2062 herald a new swinging 60s era? many of today's active people were born in the 1960s. So I'm assuming people are going to live and be active till they're 100. So being 100 years old is going to be the new 60 or the new 70. And are the product of the swinging 60s generation. And after all, Boris did say that the Olympic Games was going to create another generation, didn't he? So what has London learned in this last century? Well, it's learned that change is inevitable, but London's energy to lead its own future is not diminished. London is now at the heart of the United States of Europe and a leading member of the federated state of Great Britain. Only the problem of England remains, but that isn't a problem for London. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So we've seen two very contrasting views, really. Almost a dystopic, sort of nihilistic approach to the future of London with increasing inequality and misery that Ben was almost anticipating as the status quo continued. We've seen perhaps a utopian renaissance for the city-state. And all of these options are available to us. So I think with that and the overview that we had from Ben, I'd throw the questioning open to the floor for further interrogation of tonight's wonderful speakers. But before we do that, perhaps we can have a round of applause for all three of them, because I think they've said I'm really excited. So we have microphones being wielded by colleagues, and so if there are any questions, who would like to start? We have one at the front here, if you can run down, and then the second one there. So.
Hello, John Danzig. I take everything with a pinch of salt because I don't think futurists have been very successful in the past on predicting the future, and in fact, they've been abysmally wrong. But I do remember an Evening Standard mock-up of London in about 2060. It might have been 2100. Or 21100, and it actually showed London absolutely covered in water. We were all drowning. So I think all the plans are probably wrong. We need to be starting a program now of mass swimming lessons, and also we need to be building a lot of boats, and all your plans are underwater.
Okay, I think we can have some comments on that. Projected sea level rises with climate change in the next 50 to 100 years, 10 centimetres, something like that?
I mean, the only comment I would make on that is that actually in one of the sessions, we did look at quite a lot of architectural representations of the 50-year future, and a lot of them tended to be very dystopic and to show the city of London in ruins and to show flooding and so on as a way of kind of playing out the scenarios of climate change and economic crisis as well. So it's, you know, if you go to the architecture school down the road in the Bartlett, that's what architects are speculating on at the moment. So
we'll be drinking seawater in 50 years' time.
Desalinated, I hope.
Exactly.
So I think, no doubt, climate change, very important factor. Sea level change is happening, perhaps not right at the rate that might be shown in the standard, although obviously exposure to surges and extreme events will become more problematic, and so the whole issue of the next Thames barrier is an issue which has to be addressed, and also those plans for housing to the east of the Thames barrier, I think, is also quite an interesting area for consideration in the future as well. Thank you. Another question over there, yes.
Thank you. Patrick Hughes, Director of Salient Work. I was hugely interested by what you had to say, but there was one disappointment. The word London, of course, featured frequently in what you had to say, but only one of you used the word Londoners, and that was once. That was you, Janice. And I think, if I may say so, that there's a sense from what you've said this evening, I can't speak for the rest of your research, that you've fallen into the trap of thinking more about the hardware than the software of the city. I think we need to think more about Londoners and think of them as a unique resource and opportunity, particularly in all their glorious diversity, which really you haven't touched on at all, and their youthful energy. In other words, their fascinating cultural and population demographic. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, so I was trying to guess at that by saying that London was going to take charge of itself, and the decisions it had taken to ban cars and to kind of turn the city over to itself and rethink about how it was using that city was one of the sort of themes that I was trying to explore. And I agree with you that the diversity of London is its strength. But I wonder almost if we've moved beyond remarking on it, because it is so fundamental to London. It is what London is. So there's no, how do we find a new language about just accepting that and then seeing that as enormous strength, which it is. And I think that strength is the thing that's going to drive London, actually. And that's really what I was trying to elaborate on.
Ben Harris.
Sure. I would agree with you as well. I guess partially picking up on some of the things Ben was saying about having a sort of a common definition or a new definition of what we mean by urban regeneration. I mean, by the very nature of the work that we do at Future of London, our major focus is on the built environment. Whether it's necessarily fair to burden the word urban regeneration with also having to deal with other areas of economic development, or whether actually we're looking at a related and very, very important set of issues, and actually, given the state of the public finances, probably something which we're going to need to focus on more in London, and certainly the government is clearly focused on it. But there's also no getting away from the fact that they are very, very difficult, often not altogether tangible challenges as well, that often involve specific families with long-term worklessness issues, etc., which from the state's point of view are very difficult to try and intervene, perhaps far more difficult to imagine intervening in than managing to build some new infrastructure or some new houses. So I absolutely take the point, and it's surely something which we're going to hear more of in public policy debates going forward.
Ben, you mentioned, I think, the loss of the mixed community was one of the threats that you highlighted. Perhaps you could...
Yeah, sure. I think I was talking a lot about Londoners, but just not using that word. I was talking about the community and how I think diversity requires certain parts of the city to be affordable, and the dominant regeneration practices at the moment do not work towards affordability being maintained over the long term. So I think that was a key point that I wanted to raise, and also that regeneration should be, in fact, community-led, not just involving communities or consulting communities. That actually, the research has shown that it's successful if it's community-led, rather than being imposed. So,
thank you. I have a question here.
Ben stressed the problem of social divide, poor people against rich people. But first of all, we have to understand, what are these poor people going to be doing in London in 50 years' time, given the labour-saving device, technology and science? What's going to be their role? Will they be here in London? Before you say there's going to be a social divide, will they be here in London, in a big city? Can you share with us what you think they're going to be doing in the poor people in 50 years' time?
Sure. I mean, if you look at Henry Mayhew's mid-19th century London life and the London poor, a lot of those jobs are still around in London. A lot of current service jobs would be recognisable from that. So I'm sorry, but I don't believe that the jobs and the labour is going to change that much. The city needs to be serviced. The city, I think Dominique Lepour, the French philosopher, says, the city is a jewel fed by lowly operations, and it still will be in 50 years' time.
So pass it on.
Yes, please.
You envisage then same employment situations?
Not exactly the same, but I think there will be. 50 years is not that far ahead.
Basically the same, though. I mean, you've got to have hotels, you've got to have shops, you've got to have transport, people running the transport.
Yeah.
I've been around for 60 years as a worker and 20 as a developing individual. I've worked for 4 local authorities, and I've been in planning, not your side of it, but legal planning. Mm-hmm. All these things take time. Point one I would make is add another 50 years, because any redevelopment in this huge city will be patching. Your recent example of the Olympic Games area is probably a way ahead for clearing an area, but we haven't got too many areas like that to be cleared. Otherwise, you've got to knock down stuff before you put stuff up. Now that will take a lot of time because there's a lot of opposition. Unless you say, we're going to take over, I used to live in Islington, we're going to take over Islington and redevelop it. The state is going to do it, because that's the only way you'll get something done in its entirety. The rest of it will be biting into certain areas, developing those areas. Another 5 or 10 years later, you'll do another one. You've got to add another 50 years to your plan. But I do think that once you've decided on an area, such as the one, well, the Olympic Games, the area progress was a little bit dodgy at one stage, and then somebody pressed the lever and it was moved up. Now you've got to face it, these things can go wrong. Look at what's happening in the West End, I call it the West End, Tottenham Court Road area. It was chaos for ages. Who suffers? Londoners. I'm a Londoner. So you can't envisage big developments without a very careful plan. You've got 33 London boroughs, you've got to knock the heads together of the 33 town clerks, or clerks, London Borough clerks. You've got a heck of a problem in getting a plan that really is meaningful. The plans that were created post-war have taken ages to implement. All of the time since the war, we're still creaking at the edges with some. So it's going to take another 50 years, and it's going to take big thinking to get areas redeveloped. Now, if you can knock that down, I'm interested.
Yeah, I'm not I don't think we're suggesting that we'll have London redeveloped by 2062. But Ben, you're engaged with a lot of authorities. Perhaps you'd like to comment on the challenges of the fragmentation of the municipality into the boroughs and so forth in developing coherent plans.
Sure. I mean, I guess that's a long-standing problem for London. I mean, you know, it's not the case that boroughs don't work together and don't work together with other agencies. But I guess what I would add to your points is that we are entering into a period, or we're now in a period, where the levels of public investment that we've seen in these kind of developments just isn't going to be available. And so never mind anything on the scale of the Olympics, even smaller regeneration schemes that have received significant public subsidy, that's off the agenda for the foreseeable future. And so we need to find new models, you know, as well as presenting a big challenge, that is an opportunity to find new models of conceiving of regeneration and of delivering it. But I think we're probably quite a way off. I mean, there are specific instances within London where public bodies have significant land holdings that are significant, that are suitable for regeneration and can be used, but that's not necessarily the case across the piece, and they're not necessarily in the parts of London that you would seek to redevelop. So I agree with you, it's a very big challenge, and it's not going to get easier anytime soon, but we do need to meet it.
Janice?
I think I want to sort of say I do agree with one of the points that you made, and that was around public authorities building again. We already have at least 4 London boroughs who set up housing companies, and the only time in our history when we had huge numbers of houses or dwellings being built was actually at the time when local authorities were building them, even before RSLs, before housing associations. Now, I'm not sure I agree with the point about there being no money, because if we look at the powers in the 2011 Localism Act, then local authorities, and indeed all the different accounting standards are changing, the ability for local authorities now to capitalise development, set up development companies, capitalised on their own assets. Now, if you can't do that in London, you can't do it anywhere, and lots of places across the country are doing it, Liverpool and, you know, in the northeast. So actually, London boroughs are sitting on huge assets which don't need to sell, they need to capitalise. And if you look at the banks and look at the city, they're sitting on piles of cash, pension funds and so on, looking for safe investment, patient investment. So I think until London boroughs really start building again, not council houses, but housing for different tenures, a mixture of tenures, I think that's going to be the way of moving forward. And that's why I was suggesting looking at car parks and looking at these kind of sites now that we don't need so much, And there are still places in London. Anyone been on a train through Willesden recently? I mean, there's masses of land in London that we just don't see. So that would be mine.
Okay, we have a question over here.
I just wanted to build on some of the comments that came from the gentleman in the audience earlier around the lack of a focus on the demographic of London and Londoners in some of your assessments of what London will look like. And one of the things that I was surprised not to hear any of you mention, given the implications it has for the built environment, for issues around affordability within the capital, and also for local authority finance, is around the changing demographic towards older people within the city. And when you're talking about getting regeneration back to something that isn't about moving people who are viewed to be problematic out of a particular space, how you imagine that a London of 2062 is addressing that challenge and how that might impact on what the built environment begins to look like.
Well, I think, Janice, you'd solved the problem by making 100 the new 60, but perhaps you'd like to comment on that first.
Well, we probably are going to have to get off the idea of buying houses for a bit, although I think we'll end up doing that until there's until the government, the Treasury can come up with a new pension product. We're all stuck with buying houses if we can, as our longer term sort of nest egg for the future. Thinking about older people and thinking about affordability, the only way to challenge the market is to create more units or more dwellings. And the only organisations I can see who can really break the land hoarding tendencies of housing developers with consents and land is actually the public sector, who can actually put more, as soon as the public sector builds more, it actually reduces the value of the sites owned and being hoarded by developers. And I think that's what we've got to see. And I agree. You need other interventions. You need, to think differently. The government, the current approaches clearly are not sustainable in the long term. So. No, I agree we're not doing enough now. I'm just saying we've got to attack it in quite a different way. And if you go back to think about Harold Macmillan and, whatever it was, how many homes a year we were building, most of those homes were being built by the public sector, not just in London, but across England. And to some extent, we've got to get back to that in different ways. And, I can't wave a wand and make it happen. But that's the only way, it seems to me, you're going to increase the volume. And looking at other uses for buildings.
Yeah, well, we can't have a dialogue. I want to hear panel members. Ben, you mentioned the healthy cities and the problem with the demographic and the age profile. Would you like to expand about how you think that might be addressed?
Sure. I mean, just to say that that issue came up in one of the workshops that we ran, and the need for better housing for the elderly, but also in terms of a more active elderly population as well. So I think that's really important. I just wanted to ask, am I allowed to ask a question to Janice? In terms of thinking about new models of affordability, one of the things that's come up in Urban Lab workshops that we've been running, and also Boris has been talking about, is community land trust. And I was just wondering what you think of that model, because it seems something that people are positive about.
I think it is, but I don't think it's I think it's one contribution, but I don't think it's going to produce the volume required on its own, would be my view. So I'd support it wholeheartedly, but I don't think that's the only measure.
Okay, we've got lots of other questions. There's a gentleman here, first of all.
Paul Watt-Birkbeck. Question for Ben Campkin, really. I don't disagree with your ethical principles for regeneration, but I just wondered if you could say a little bit about how you think that those might be embedded in regeneration schemes, given that if anything, the political economic tendency is for many of those issues not to be looked at. So, for example, in relationship to housing need, that's virtually a concept which is redundant as far as a lot of local authorities are concerned, because essentially, as you well know, when you look at regeneration schemes that are being done, both in Labour and Conservative authorities across London, the net effect of those regeneration schemes is invariably that either you get no increase in social housing, or you get actually a reduction in social housing as the old estates get bulldozed, and then you get lots of private developments. So the question is really then, how can one embed those ethical principles into the current political economic structures, given that they seem to be, if anything, going against those very laudable aims?
No, I agree, and there is no easy answer to that question. They are almost all directly opposed to the current trend. So this is the key question. But I think in terms of setting a research agenda, these are kind of issues that we should be dealing with. And I don't think this was about a dystopic projection of the future. I think actually my assessment was meant to be kind of realistic. It might sound pessimistic, but it's actually realistic of what's happening now in terms of what the research tells us. So it was not a dystopic projection of the future.
It's just the future is dystopic.
Yeah. I think just what I would add, and partially in response to Janice's point as well, I think ultimately what's going to be needed, certainly within local government, is a culture shift, I think, in terms of what boroughs are for. And certainly, I think an outcome from the Localism Act will be that you'll see a divergence in approach across London. I mean, that's not necessarily something new, but it will probably be exacerbated where some boroughs decide, actually, yes, it is our role to build houses, and we'll seek to do that, and we've got the land to do it, and we've got the expertise to do it, or we can bring it in. And others will very much see that that's not their role. And you just have to look at boroughs like Bartlett and others who are actually seeking to commission out services and actually see their role as being a much more a coordinating one, I suppose. So Ben's absolutely right. There are no easy answers, and we're not going to get there very quickly. But you can see across London areas of experimentation where boroughs are behaving differently. And how successful or otherwise, how replicable those models are going to be, well, we'll find out, I suppose.
Gentleman at the back.
Hi, good evening, Gary Hayes. I'd like to ask the question about technology. I sit in front of a computer 14, 16 hours a day. What were you doing 50 years ago? And in 50 years' time, materials, energy will be universal. We already have the solutions, so we can have as much energy as we want. The change in human performance will be significant with the growth of intelligence, artificial. How do you see the city of the future?
So, easy question.
An easy question, yeah.
Well, Janice, since you did speak of the future, perhaps you could start.
I kind of avoided technology because I think that's one of the most difficult areas to predict. If you think back 50 years to the early 60s, then I think people were not even then much using phones, landlines. I think it was very much a paper-based, face-to-face type working environment. And then gradually it became more phone-based, and then obviously to where we are now. So I just think it's quite difficult to predict how we're going to respond to new devices that are appearing almost weekly that offer us new functionality. But it seems to me at the moment, if you look at the amount of time that lots of people in business are now spending more time on Twitter, I was reading today, on Twitter, than business people across Europe, than actually reading The Economist or Financial Times or Wall Street Journal or whatever. So it seems to me that may go too far in one direction because although it's very social, it's also very isolating if you're constantly looking at a screen. And I wonder if we'll come back to something that's a bit more personal. But I think it is a difficult area to predict. And whatever we said today will be wrong tomorrow, I think.
Ben has discovered courage to answer.
I have.
Giving you time to think.
Exactly. No, I guess what I would say is, I mean, the sort of proposition that you put forward, I suppose, is one that in various forms. I guess we've heard a number of times in the past, and actually is often used to kind of say, well, you won't need to live in the cities anymore because technology will allow you to do all the business that you need to do and actually have all of the advantages of living in a nice leafy countryside area and avoid the pollution and the congestion and all the rest of it. And actually all of the prevailing evidence suggests that that's not the case, and the continual importance of face-to-face interactions will remain, and the trust that they entail and the interactions between talented people that is currently a hallmark of the London economy will continue to be important, even if we are spending 12 to 16 hours a day in front of computer screens.
Yes, I mean, thanks to Janice's committee, I guess a lot of us were suggested we work at home over the Olympics, and it was very, very, very fun for a bit, but I also noticed a lot of colleagues couldn't wait to get back to have a chat over the coffee to talk about the Olympics, probably. That's it.
Right, thank you. Stephen Boxall from Regeneration X. I'm an independent regeneration consultant. I want to bring up London's hinterland. It's often said that London's economic footprint is much larger than its political boundaries. So to what extent do you think the hinterland might change, and what extent does it have to change for London to have all these changes that you were talking about? And I think it also connected that with that, a point someone else made from the audience, the rich are going to have jobs, the poor are going to have jobs to serve the rich. What about the middle? I mean, already the middle has been hollowed out.
Ben, you were talking about the becoming a more unequal society, which suggests, you know, there's lots of activity at the bottom and people at the top, not in the middle. So, what do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think London is a city where there are polarizations all over the city. It's not so easy to describe it as a rich centre and a poor outskirts. It's never been like that, and so I think the polarization will still be dispersed around the city. And then in terms of the hinterland, one of the things that came up in the workshop that I was at was about the need to develop on the green belt and green corridors or green wedges. So I guess that's a big debate, which probably Janice will be able to say something on in terms of the immediate future.
I mean, I think the movements in London, the transport movements, journey to work, is not as clear, or is not as we might think it is. I mean, if we think back 50 years ago, the sort of in-out movements, which we think are typical, probably were. But if we think now, many of the movements are east-west or lateral, and actually in-out. So when years ago, I used to travel and work in Woking, and I live in Clapham Junction is my station. So I was kind of the only person getting on the train, and now masses of people get on the train in Clapham Junction to go to Woking. If you go to Woking, which is a place that used to have heavy commuting into London, actually now a much higher proportion of people in Woking now work locally rather than travel into London. Yes, people do travel in, but proportionately that is much more even than it was, say, 30 years ago. So in a way, what might happen is that hinterlands become, over time, say more self-sufficient, but actually their networks develop and they change the way they work. I think we also need to think about the effect of Crossrail and what that will do. And the stealthy increase of orbital rail is changing the way people are using London as well. So you might argue that the real issue is, can the centre of London maintain its authoritative position when all these other things are happening? So I think that's maybe an area that will continue to change.
Janice, I'll just ask you a question. The London city-state loses its control over and no need for a green belt because that's governed by England. So would we reach a situation where, in your scenario, we had a gentrified city with leafy avenues where there were previously bus lanes and so forth, and shanty towns developing around Hertfordshire, and St Albans becomes the new sink space for the gastarbeiters to be brought into London to support its affluent middle classes?
Well, Slough already has the most beds in sheds. We don't have to wait for the future for that, certainly. I don't know. I think that
I think that places will kind of, I mean, if we look at, if you think something like functional economic areas and local enterprise partnerships are really going to work, and I think they're going to be the new local authorities of the future, actually. But if that is going to work, and they're going to have potentially the same dynamics and the same sort of, I mean, the whole of England is going to be covered with largish areas which are going to be like Transport for London. And I don't, you know, that's just about to happen in 2014. All the areas outside London are just forming into those groups now by the end of this month. I think if one area where London is weaker is that it doesn't actually look to see what's happening elsewhere. It gets to its boundary and is a bit sort of aloof from the rest. But actually the rest of England is getting organised, and the question is what effect will that be for London?
Gentleman in the black t-shirt.
Good evening, Paul Campy. I think Ben touched upon privately managed land, and Ben Campkin touched on privately managed land, and with many of the thoroughfares to the Olympic Park actually being Westfield Stratford City, where private security roamed those thoroughfares and where photography was not encouraged, shall we say. Do you think there's an inevitability that we'll have more of those sorts of developments where previously perhaps public land becomes privately managed? Do you think that's inevitable, and do you think that's a good thing or a necessary thing for future regenerations?
Well, I wouldn't want to say it was inevitable, but it's definitely the trend, and it does fundamentally change the character of what those spaces are, and what relationship people have to them, and what powers they have to use them and to interact in those spaces. So for me, it's not, it's something that a lot of people are very critical of at the moment. So Anna Minton, the journalist with her book Ground Control, Fear and Happiness in the 21st Century City, writing about the kind of securitization of public space, so that the turning of public spaces into an image of public space, but actually places that are actually highly controlled and ordered.
I mean, I think just factually, obviously you can't compare Stratford or Olympic Park in games mode to the rest of the time, and we'll have to see what it looks like next year when it's opened on the first anniversary. But I would say, on a just sort of factual point, that because the park is in different boroughs, when we were looking at design standards on the Committee for Roads, Footpaths, Cycleways, we made sure that each of the boroughs had their own standards adopted in their part of the park, so that they can adopt them without any problem when they're passed over. And I think old-style regeneration or old-style top-down UDC type approaches would have just done one standard across the piece and let them get on with it, whereas we were very sensitive to thinking about the management afterwards, realising that would be the case. So I think it's too early to say, really.
And I mean, just thinking panel, and again picking up on Janice's point earlier of London Borough land holdings and also the land that's now been transferred into the GLA, it's obviously the case that both boroughs and the GLA, have some influence over that, and if, those are political decisions that will be taken at that level, and therefore, that there's no reason why it would necessarily be the case, I would say.
Sorry, I'm just showing my naivety by being shocked and surprised that different boroughs have different standards on footpaths.
Oh,
but
cycleways are the ones.
Oh, my goodness.
A lot of what was said here, I think, assumes a certain path of growth, or London maintaining its global lead, talking about wealth that would allow regeneration and population growth. I just wonder if we are kind of daring to look far enough into the future, 2062. In the 1930s, I don't think anybody would imagine that the British Empire would be gone only 20 years later. Well, maybe there was signs, or that the Docklands would suddenly, within a decade or two, would disappear. And now that we see, the growth of Asia, the Middle East, Africa, a lot of London's success is based on migration, on international companies it is possible, I mean, maybe we're not kind of stretching our imagination enough, that maybe in 50 years London will lose its significance in the global economy.
It could do. I mean, the point I was making about investment was not about global wealth, but the fact that there's already a certain asset value in London that can be utilised, and there are resources that can be deployed to utilise that. If you think about London globally, then I think that I agree with what somebody else said, that it takes a long time to change. And we thought that China was going to make the lead, and still may they, but their growth rate has come down. We've seen that this week. They're actually way lower than their target. We have an uncertain leadership election. We don't know who's going to take over in China. So global capital doesn't want to go to uncertainty. And London, has its problems in relation to financial regulation seem to me to be more critical than anything else about threats from China. It's the way it's actually managed itself. But if it can get through that, then somewhere in Europe is going to be that. And the issue about London being a capital city and having that international role is not one that's shared by anywhere else at all. It's not shared by New York, for example. So, it has a lot going for it.
No, I mean, I would echo what Janice said. I suppose, having said that, there is I guess, we don't have to look too far back into the past to a time when London's population was falling, actually, and you would have probably struggled to predict, the role of London in the UK economy that it now takes. So, I suppose there is a point there that, we don't want to become complacent about London's preeminence on the global stage. I think there's also probably a point that picks up on some of the things that Ben has said, or that we've all said, really, that it is important, that it's likely to become more important that we remember who growth is for, and that it makes sure that it's serving Londoners. And for example, the influx of overseas investment into London property is a fantastic example of that. It's heralded as a sign of success and of buoyancy in the London housing market. But you don't have to look too hard at the London housing market to see that, yes, it may be buoyant, but it's fundamentally dysfunctional, and it's not serving the interests of Londoners in many ways. So that's something which we must continue to look at, and it's probably going to become more important.
I said originally when we started that UCL describes itself as London's global university. Experience shows you can't have a global university in a city that isn't a global city. So it's part of our mission at UCL to do what we can to ensure that London sustains its prosperity and its global position, because without that, we can't sustain our own global position. So there's a degree of enlightened self-interest in trying to make sure that we don't, it's not futurology that we're trying to do, but what we're trying to do is to anticipate as best as we can the challenges that our city faces and see what it is we can do to mitigate the negative and accentuate the positive. I think we have time for probably one more question. Lady there.
Mary Keneally, I'm very interested in, and as you keep talking about a global city needs to be well led. And I think my question to the panel is about leadership and the governance of London. There are, Janice made some great points about the issue about, what kind of emerging city we want, where, we close the cars from zone 1 and 2. How do we get to that ability to have that decision making? One of the Bens talked about, the idea that, and I think, sorry, it crossed over between two of you, the question of capitalisation and realisation of assets. I've spent the last 2 years working for the 6 host boroughs and as their chief advisor on employment and skills. So there's a real issue about, they had a single goal to coalesce around. That's been taken apart, and the question of collaboration going forward and how they move from being the host boroughs to the growth boroughs is exercising minds. But some of the issues, the way London's government governed at the moment, the role of the mayor actually dislocates the boroughs a lot of the time, and the question of the localism agenda, will it really allow the boroughs to move that forward, or would that be seen as a threat to the mayor's powers? I think there's a disconnect there, and I'd like to hear from the panel on some of those issues.
Happy to start, yes. I think you're right. There's huge tensions. In London in so many ways is unique to the rest of the country, but perhaps no more so than the way it was, the impact that the Localism Act and those reforms have played out, where regional policy has been disbanded across the rest of the country. It's actually been strengthened here. And I think there was a real concern, and which perhaps still exists, amongst London boroughs, that actually far from being an empowering agenda for them, they've had power taken away from the top, and that's gone up to the mayor, and then potentially the empowerment of neighbourhoods below them, and actually it's made life much more difficult for London boroughs. I mean, whether that will actually be played out or not remains to be seen. On your point about how do we get to Janice's utopian vision of a car-free zone 1 and 2, and speaking personally, that seems to me to be a very pleasant set of circumstances to arrive at. There is, of course, a sort of a democratic point within that, and that people do like their cars, and it seems. I mean, I was just meeting with colleagues at Transport for London today, and we all agreed that there is a kind of a danger that in living the kinds of lifestyles that we do, I don't drive personally, you can forget the fact that actually lots of people do depend on their cars in order to remain economically active, so. Whether it's right that we'll have an all-powerful mayor that can just decree those kind of things or not, I'm not 100% sure, although I do personally probably share your enthusiasm for the outcome. I guess I would reiterate just finally one of the points I made in the presentation, where I fully expect there to be another round of devolution to London in some guise or another over the next period, probably leading up to the next general election. Quite what form that will take, I don't know, whether that will be the devolution of particular revenue streams or funding pots. But I'd be very surprised if the mayor doesn't want to try and capitalise on his popularity within the Conservative Party, if nothing else, and try and push that forward. But those tensions, I would imagine, between borough leadership and the mayor and other organisations will remain.
Janice.
Well, I mean, I think you're going to have mayoral candidates with big ideas. I think that's an important thing. I mean, London is already the least car-dependent place in the country, and those figures were published last week. So, and actually, I think it's probably why older Londoners will live longer, because they're used to walking, using public transport to get to work. Then they get their freedom pass. There's a kind of culture of being on the move in London, which I think that distinguishes it now from a lot of other cities. Where they are more car dependent still, even though they do have good public transport. So I think that's another issue. In terms of the boroughs, I mean, certainly the issue about amalgamating boroughs or to sort of reduce the number has been on the agenda at least since 1965 or 64, since we reorganised last time. And London government is unique in the country, is going so long without any kind of reform. I mean, most other places have been reformed at least twice in that period. So some people might say, oh, that's because it works. I think the others might say, well, it's because it's politically so difficult. And I think the attempts to bring boroughs together, to run services together, has been a sort of stepping stone, or attempted stepping stone, to see if that would work. I don't think it will. I suspect the change will come from underneath, and I'm fully expecting to have a wholly parish to London before too long. And parishes now have the same legal powers as local authorities. And so actually you might get a different kind of change coming along with local management. And I think that's the one I'd be looking at.
Do you want to say anything about our St Pancras parish?
No, but just my fellow panellists have given very eloquent answers to that question. I guess my only experience of dealing with the administrative boundaries in the city through my research is looking at pest control, and how pest control is quite radically different in the different boroughs, and pests are obviously a problem that should be dealt with centrally and doesn't have respect for boundaries. So,
So if the fox can get over the border, it's free and free. Okay, well, we've had a chance to have a discussion on some of the points. There's so many more, I know. Sorry if you haven't had a chance to ask your question. You will have a chance, however, to catch the panellists. We are inviting you to withdraw to one of the great developments of London in 1828, the Wilkins building in the quadrangle across the street. There'll be wine and refreshments available there, and hopefully our panel members will be able to join us and you can collar them further. But in the meantime, could I ask you to thank our panel members for their contribution to this evening?